Consider the following example of logical operators. I have a date picker on a form, and I pick a particular date and press submit, and it judges whether the year that I've picked is actually in this entry, or if I pick a year that's not in this entry, will assess whether it's not in this entry either. Looking at the form, it's straightforward enough. I'm using a post method and I'm using a input type of date, and I'm labeling the value that comes in from that as date. Going to the results page, the first thing I need to do is pick out the value from the post array that's labeled as date, and I'm assigning it into a variable called $date. And then I would need to see what the format is of that date value coming in. So straight away I'm just going to echo out the variable date. Let's take a look at how that runs. So today's date, press submit. It is coming out the year first of all, a hyphen, the month, a hyphen, and then the day. So back to my code, first thing I would want to do is I want to isolate just the year, and I can do that by using the substring function. So I pass in date as the first parameter. I want to start taking characters from the 0 index, and I want to take 4 characters. So I'm going to echo that straight out, and let's see if that has the desired effect. So I'll just refresh here, and I should see just the year, and I do. Back in my code, I'm just going to assign that into a new variable called $year. And at this stage, I want to assess whether the year is in this century, which is between the year 2000 and less than 2100. So I put in an if statement with a logical operator, and there is my 2 ampersands that denotes the AND logical operator. And I'm assessing whether $year is greater than or equal to 2000, and assessing the comparison $year is less than 2100. Both of those conditions have to be true for the overall condition to be true. When both of them are true, it will execute the code in here. I then will put in an else part of the statement, and I'll put in what happens if either of those items is not true. Well, if either of them is not true, then it's not in this century. So I'll go back to my browser and I'll test that. So again, today's date is in this century, and if I put in dates either side of this century, is not in this century, and is not in this century either. Now let's think about the scenario whether if we want to make an addition onto that code, and if I put in today's date and submit, not only does it sense whether this year is in this century, but it also judges whether it's in this millennium or not. So 2018 is in this century and this millennium. What about this date here? Well, it's not in this century, but is in this millennium. And lastly, it's neither in this century nor this millennium. The first thing I will do is I will go to my if statement and add on that this is in this century and this millennium. Then I will put in an else if statement, and again using a logical operator, I will say if this year is greater than or equal, it can be 2000 or it can be 2100, it doesn't matter, the result will be the same, and is less than 3000, then I know that the year is not in this century but is in this millennium. And finally, if I put in an else catch-all, that if both of these two conditions return false, then all that is left is that it is neither in this century or this millennium. Both of them are false. So let's go back to testing that. So that's not in this century nor this millennium, and today's date is in this century and this millennium, And if I go for a future date, is not in this century nor millennium, but one that is in this millennium, is not in this century but is in this millennium. So there is a brief example of using the AND logical operator in PHP.